Well, welcome everybody. My name is Rich Dione. I am the co-director of the Fusion Studio here at Purdue University.
And I'm Mary Pilot, co-director of the Fusion Studio with Rich.
I was going to announce that you're leaving us soon, but maybe I shouldn't tell them that yet.
Just hold off.
Just hold off on that. So there you go. Spoiler alert. Welcome to this month's First Friday at Fusion Studio. We're really thrilled to have with us here, joining us from New York City. And my wife jokes all the time, I still call New York City the city because it is the city, but here in the Midwest, it is not. There are other the cities. And so she's from Kansas. She gets mad. But so John is joining us from the city to talk about his work and his experience and sort of the history of show networks and show control. We'll have some time for questions and answers at the end, but there's a lot to talk about. So we're not going to say much more. We're just going to turn it right over to John. So thanks, John, for joining us.
Welcome.
Great. Excuse me. Great. Well, thanks so much for having me. It's a real honor to be invited to these things. And I love talking about this stuff. I'm very passionate about it. So I try not to go down too many rabbit holes, I think, as we get going. I'm going to hit my screen share here, make sure I get the right thing. There we go. Looks like, there we go. So the title of this became kind of, I think after I agreed to do this months ago, and then I was like, what was I thinking with this title? Like when I finally put it together, but I think I touched on all these bases coming together here. So, and I just mentioned, I have everything that I talk about. We're going to look at a few things is all linked up on my website. It's controlgeek.net. I'm in the middle of a big update on that. So it looks a little weird right now, but I just put a bunch of stuff up there. Move this Zoom window out of my thing. Here we go. So who am I? I just like right this month, I'm early retiring from 24 years at the City University of New York, CityTech, teaching entertainment technology there. So I'm still kind of trying to figure out what my title should be now. But I'm a consultant, educator, sound engineer, author. I've written, I guess it's sort of 5 versions of the same book or iterations of the same book over the last few decades here. The current one, which is the one I really recommend, is this one just came out in 2020. It's about networking. And we're going to talk a little about like how all this stuff sort of evolved to that point. I'm a local one stagehand. In fact, when I teach classes for them, they call me Professor Brother, which is one of my favorite titles. I was a subject matter expert for the ETCP certification exam. So if you see networking questions on there, I probably wrote those. I'm sort of one of the few non-lighting people in that group. So, and we're actually about to gear up again, I think, to update that test. So done a little bit of everything. I started out, I was very fortunate. I worked for this company called Associates and Farron in the 80s, right when I got out of college. And I'm going to show a few pictures here really quickly. That's sort of where I started. I like jumped into, I went to Ithaca for theater, and then I sort of jumped in. Oh, sorry. And Popsicle's lunch bowl was going off. I forgot to turn that off. So she's going to run out of there. I muted everything except that. So, and so I've done like feature films, concerts, theater, theme parks, you name it. I've done a little bit of everything. And I also a photographer at the Storm Chase. You can see some photos behind me, and I'll probably be passing through your region in May or so, but I haven't figured out what I'm doing yet. So we're going to talk about today. I wrote a bunch on this idea of show technology reaching a maturity point about 10, 13 years ago. I'll go through that a little bit, talk about how that maturity has impacted the industry. And then specifically show control, which I know you guys touch on, and we're going to talk a little bit that towards the end here. And then how has all this impacted live storytelling? Because that's what we always do. And I always feel like, you know, my background's in theater, but I've just done all this time teaching entertainment technology where we did a haunted house, we did concerts, we did all this stuff. But I feel like wherever we're doing, whatever field we're in, we're really telling a story. Even a corporate event, you're trying to sell cars or whatever, you're trying to tell the story of the cars. So to me, it's, and Penn and Teller always have a saying called "there's only one show business." So that means that it includes, you know, the balloon animal person, the magician, the opera singer. They're all in the same business, which I always fully believe about that. So to get started, I wrote 2 articles and a couple thousand words on this, which you can read on my website, but I'm just going to give sort of the highlights. But sort of the idea is that the dawn of the modern show production era was in 1965 when I was 2 years old. The Beatles at Shea Stadium I actually had my downstairs neighbor in Brooklyn actually was at this show and another one. And Bob McCarthy, who's kind of a famous sound engineer, really pioneering guy. His brother was at this show, and they will tell you that they saw the Beatles. They did not hear them because you can see this was the PA, a bunch of column speakers, which now is sort of predecessor to line array, which is kind of interesting. But if you look at this by today's standards, there's no stage roof, no backdrop, no video, no stage lighting. This is just a stadium lights. There's not one light down there. The second iteration of this, there's a couple foul spots, big old carbon arc foul spots down here. A way, way, way underpowered PA. So no one heard anything. And then the Beatles themselves had no stage monitors, so they couldn't hear anything. So just their, decades of playing in small clubs for, I think the one in Germany, they used to play like 8 hours a night or something. Like they were able to play, but they couldn't hear. So if you see the film, it's like, oh, it sounds great. Well, that's what direct out from the mics would do, but not, they couldn't hear anything. So, and Bob McCarthy also said, I quote him in this article, that, they basically booked a show without the ability to do the show, which is really kind of an interesting idea. So this had a huge impact on the audience. Like my downstairs neighbor, I know it's in her 70s, I think, she remembers every minute of this, but she says she couldn't hear anything. So but it was just like, they're there. That's what the excitement was. So here's one of the same musicians Shea Stadium is gone, but that was replaced by Citi Field. So here's one of the same musicians as Paul McCartney, 44 years later. So we can see like we came a long way from this to this, right? So now we have a big stage roof. It's a little older PA by today's standards, but still a big PA, lighting, video, all this stuff. And so you can see this is 2009, like this, it pretty much looks like a concert from today. And that's kind of the point I'm going to make here. So this was 15 years ago, but we went through this enormous evolution from this to this, but now from here, 10, 15 years ago, it's pretty much the same thing as today, right? So, so backstage, that is pretty much the same. Maybe it's a different brand of moving light, an LED source instead of something else. Maybe it's an updated line array or whatever. But and then so even today, if you're going to have a big crazy tour today, they may push the envelope, but they're going to use these basic building blocks. So the basic building blocks are kind of sorted out. So that's sort of my thesis on this, is that we went through 3 phases of this: the early days, then this crazy rapid acceleration, and I'll go through this a little bit. Right when I got out of school is when this started, so that's just coincident with my life. And I think this is where we are now. Like we're at some kind of maturity point, and we got there about these days 10 or 15 years ago. And it depends on which area you're looking at, all this kind of stuff. So back to this curve, this is sort of the classic exponential growth curve. And of course, this is around 1985 or so. This is around 2010. And of course, this curve is common, and it's not coincidental. This is common for computer networking, all this general technology in the world. And that's also because we're obviously integrated with all that stuff. But that's sort of the idea, is that I have to move my Zoom window out of the way here. So we went through this insane period where everything was changing. And now like the technical skills that you need, it's a lot more very different from what I graduated with. But now the adoption keeps continuing on, but the sort of skill level, there's always something new, but the fundamentals are sorted out and we're there. So that's a big deal, actually, when you kind of go through this. So how did I come up with this idea? First off, I lived it. So this was like when I was 12 or 13 in those days, like I made my own light board. I was called Jack before I went to college, which I probably shouldn't have changed. This is very dangerous. Don't do this. In this case, I actually had line voltage flash pots. I'm 12 or 13 in a small town. I have no idea what I'm doing. And then when I got out of school, I went right in. I'm in this film called The Manhattan Project. Ever seen it? That's me operating a big laser down there. And this is even a good example of like, this was the laser we had. This is a giant transformer somewhere. It's water cooled. It's 440 volts, and it's had one green beam come out of it, and that's it. These days, you can buy a laser scanner for a few $1,000 that runs on line voltage and goes through this stuff. So just jump ahead a little bit. So I worked on Little Shop of Horrors there. And so for this, again, when I say we, I mean, I'm the kid with the soldering iron. I'm not the geniuses who made this, but the company had to make this camera, right? This is a motion control film camera, built on an old pin registered camera from back in the day. But we had to make this stuff. So this is like this is me on the set there with a military surplus xenon lamp, and look at this old stuff. Like all of this thing now, and this is projectors that we made actually for Pink Floyd, a big, I think this one's 70 millimeter. But we didn't build a film projector, but we built everything else around it and had to kind of integrate it and write the computer code for it and all that. This is this movie called Making Mr. Right, and this is a model of this. So the idea is, again, we had to make this stuff, and you can see here, this was the computer we used to run that, run the motion control for this. I think it's either PDP is 7 or 11. And not to be like sort of show and tell, but just the idea that in my career, we've gone from this to basically all this now would be CGI. And then what's really interesting to me is with this maturity now, we're actually kind of coming back from CGI and going to this virtual production stuff, which means we're integrating live production techniques like video walls and all that kind of stuff back in to film production, which is kind of interesting. So this is on my website. You can kind of see through all this stuff. And then here's we did a haunted house at Madison Square Garden in 1995 or so. Racks of Amiga computers, there's cart machines over here, a sampler, analog EQ, all of this would be replaced by QLab today. But I don't think if you're coming out of school today, I should say one QLab instance can replace all this stuff. Coming out of school today, maybe I'm wrong, but I think something like QLab will be existing 20 years from now, because we're sort of there, right? It's solving, we haven't anywhere come near to maxing out the capacity of that system. And just see if there's anything else in here worth touching on. You get the idea. So, oh yeah, so here's going from like sound systems. This is now 10 years old, still current stuff. Like Smart has a new version. This is the Galileo software. There's a new version of that, but this picture could be from today. And that picture was from 2015, right? So we're not seeing this kind of crazy development like we saw back in sort of earlier parts of my career there. Make sure this popped back up. So, oops, I actually deleted, but I have, this is what you get when you tweak a presentation right before let me go back up here. Did I have it? There we go. So to support this idea, when I was writing these articles a couple years ago, I made this timeline. So this is also linked out for my webpage. You want to mess around with it. But the idea is like, this is the early days. There's that Beatles show. And then somewhere around in here, around 1985 or so, there's just all these like crazy shows that, and if you look, each one of these, I have like, what was the reason? Why is it on my list, right? What did it bring in? And then around here, and I stopped updating this like pre-pandemic, but around in here, like a bunch of these things really matured. And I don't want to say it's sort of slowed down, but it's definitely, we're not seeing this just insane leaps in sort of development like we did then. Also, we saw, this is like all the professional organizations. We went from a handful, a whole bunch became in existence during this time, and like all of those still exist. And now you're sort of seeing a few things. I'll mention that, Event Safety Alliance, but now it's like, oh, Infocom became a VIXA, right? That's the only change, but Infocom was started actually way back there. So and then these are all sort of each technology that I could think of, from lighting and sound, rigging, all these things. And of course, this all just started as like a napkin sketch. And this is one of the advantages of having a sabbatical. This idea that I thought was like an hour long took me like 4 weeks, And I'm not, I'm not a historian. I'm not really even sort of interested that much in the history part of it. Let me get oops, sorry, not this one. Too many things going on. Let's get this back on the screen here. Clicking too many things. The back up here, sorry, I jumped out of my screen. So again, back to this idea of this thing. So I have all the supporting evidence of that. It's I have 2 articles that I wrote in this in 2019. One for Lighting Sound America about sort of the technology, and then another one following up on a US ITT article from like 17 years earlier about the sort of teaching and educational impacts of this. So you can get both these on my website. So that's just sort of the idea, I think, that underlies sort of everything that we're talking about here. And then moving on from there is like, how does this impact the industry, right? So what does this all mean? We know how to do this stuff now. So this is, depending on how to pronounce it, is Rammstein, a crazy metal band that was, this was actually pre-pandemic, but this was playing here in last year. This is on tour now. If you look at this thing, I mean, compare this to the Beatles in a baseball stadium in 1965, and now we have just an insane thing with a giant set, crazy amount of electrical power, huge distributed sound system, flame effects, everything. And there's all kinds of crazy stuff in the show. This is just a touring concert production now. It's a big one, obviously, but we know how to do this now, and we can do this safely, which is also really important. I think it sort of boils down to sort of the big three technologies. Number one is rigging, obviously very important, and this has a safety implication, so that has an ETCP ESTA certification now. Electrical distribution, also certification. And then, of course, the third one, which is sort of my area of interest, is networking. So with those three things now, that underlines obviously rigging, and this, you can expand this into structural design, all this kind of stuff, but rigging, enormous amount of electrical power. There's actually some like Facebook groups, if you go look there, the power layout for the show was like on the Facebook groups, because they, people had tremendous pride in what they had done for the show, which is great. But we didn't have to figure it out. You just had to do it. I mean, have to integrate and all that. So what does it mean? We used to be just sort of continuously inventing all these technologies, but now with the maturity, we really have standardization, and that also means we have common work practices. So that means you can do something like this, and it's not a one-day tour. It took a couple of days to load this in or whatever, but it's not a year to put this in, right? It's a couple of days. That is because we have sort of common work practices. Also, there's an enormous amount of expertise in the industry, and the industry is, I don't know, I have it in the article, some of the growth factors, but which I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's much, much, much bigger than it was, when I got out of school. And this is all sort of the same thing. I think this theatrical no 10 out of 12s movement is related to this idea, because, I've done plenty of shows and working on a movie or whatever, like we had to stay all night to fix the thing because we just built it and the entire production is waiting on us. Now, if you're using sort of known technologies and techniques, like that's not really a thing anymore, right? So, and then I can make all kinds of arguments that I think you make better art when everybody's not burned out and just, overwhelmed and all that. But I think this is really, I didn't really research into this, but I believe this is related, right? Because things have, we have these sort of mature tools that we can sort of get on with making the art and not like inventing the tool. I'll talk a little bit more of that in a minute. I think the same idea is, if somebody wanted to do a, MBA paper on the sort of management practices, I think this is related there. So, for example, the Event Safety Alliance, which came, out of like horrible tragedy in Indiana, actually, which I wrote a bunch about on my website, because I'm sort of in that intersection of being a storm chaser and a show person. So that was, there's a bunch of things that summer that really instigated this, but now that grew into this whole thing that's now not really a technological, sort of organization, but for management and safety has become a huge thing. And it's really, I think that's, again, all part of this sort of the maturity of the industry. This also means from educational point, like we can define educational goals now. Like basically, I don't think almost nothing in any of the books that I've written was ever taught to me. Right. And that's not really the case anymore, because like these things are now sort of solidified and we can teach them other people, which means that which I think is really good. Gear, don't tell administrators this, but gear doesn't go as obsolete as fast. At my school, we had a lot of really difficult funding problems, but fortunately, our 20-year-old moving lights, we were in good shape 20 years ago. They still work, right? And they're still relevant. Of course, we would want a new LED replacement or whatever, but they still work. And for now, we can still get spare parts for them and stuff like that. So that means that wasn't true 20 years before that. Like those didn't exist 20 years before that. So we hit, again, this maturity idea. Also, this is kind of interesting. In the gear, it's really common across many industries. So I had a couple of pictures there. My, first month out of college, I went from the theater world into the feature film world. It was totally different. Like the power distribution was different. The lights that they used were different. I mean, it's still lighting and power and those type of things, but they literally use different connectors. Like all this stuff is sort of unified now. And it's really been our industry that sort of led the way. In fact, the military, uses our stuff now because we know how to do, moving power and stuff. Also, again, virtual production, you could do. You should definitely have a speaker on that if you had. And this is a really exciting area because, and what that is basically like The Mandalorian is sort of the best example of this, where they just build a giant video wall in a studio. They hook up a gaming engine with sensors on the camera. And then the performers are in the studio are seeing the final product. So there's no blue screen, no green screen. It was always blue screen in the 80s, so it's always in my head as blue screen. No green screen in that. It's just literally rendering, and the video wall, they even put a video wall on top just to light the set with. So if you see, have a sunset, the light from the screen is lighting the actors, and you're shooting it all in camera. So this is funny. It's kind of goes back to, that's the way like 2001 was shot, not with a video wall, but they literally had like film plates that they projected through a prism and all this kind of stuff. So that if you look at these shows, it looks very familiar to us from live production, because what is it? Truss, video wall, cam blocks, networks, it's all the same stuff. Esports is really just a live show. Home haunts, like there's a whole, I think it's happening right now. There's a haunted house show like in St. Louis right now. They're doing crazy stuff, all sort of the same industry. And then unlike, when I was a kid, you had to make this stuff. You can, if I was a lighting geek today that was, 13, I would just be buying some stuff on Amazon and messing around with it, right? So that's a very different world. So the impacts of this, if you're old like me, you can kind of relax a little bit and go, okay, my entire career, I've been sort of like scrambling to keep up with these just nonstop, just radical changes. And I really, it's, this is what I sort of noticed, like it's really calmed down in the last decade, which is good. And if you're young, if you're new to the industry, I think you can take some comfort in this, because I think obviously the key parts is about, you need to learn how to learn and all those type of things. But I really believe that if you learn, IP and Ethernet today, you're still going to be doing that in 10, probably 20 years. Maybe we move to IP version 6. I kind of doubt it. Maybe things changes, but it solves all the problems that we have. So we're not like looking for that thing. Another example of that is like DMX, which was new in my career, is now really old, but it's not going away, right? So these things, I'll talk more about this in a minute. Right, and so I would make a bet that 10 years from now, you look at one of those like a concert tour, which is sort of an easy thing because they're so similar. You look at that backstage, it's going to be chain motors, truss, cam locks, Ethernet switches. That stuff's going to be around. Is there a shiny new one, slightly different one? Sure, but it's not like in the circus, people actually were the first ones to take a chain motor and fly it upside down. Right, that was done in the 70s, like for touring arena people, and the chain motor manufacturers like, what are you doing? But that's common practice now, right? So that's, again, it solves a problem. We don't really need to invent that stuff. Interesting thing, this kind of has a hilarious origin, which I don't have time to go through, but I have a link here. But there's this thing called the Lindy effect, and I can't even remember how I learned about this, but the idea is that the longer something has existed, the more likely it is to continue to exist. So DMX, for example, has been around since 1986. It's likely it's not going to go away tomorrow. There's millions and millions and literally millions of devices around with DMX. We're not going to throw them out and start over. So if we're going to build something, we're going to build it out of that. That also means we're going to adapt things that weren't ever intended for that back to this old ancient protocol. That's basically what I said. And it's so it's kind of an interesting idea. Look this up because it's actually based around a deli here in New York and some comedians. That's kind of a funny origin, but it goes from there. So, but basically the idea is something's been around for a long time. It's going to continue to be around. So we're not going to just throw it out and start over. So where is future innovation going to happen? Of course, we're always going to move forward. Connectivity, sound familiar, right? Networking, right? That's what that is. Integration, that's show control, also networking. Those are so intertied these days. Optimization, this is what we're seeing. Like I'm mostly a sound person, so like Meyer Sound just released a big new amazing speaker, which is incredible. How do they market it? It's lightweight and loud, right? That's what they market. It'll save you time on the truck path, or save you your truckload and that kind of stuff, right? It's not like, oh, here's a speaker no one's ever seen before, and they just released a new subwoofer. It's really powerful and small. So this is not like we didn't have the 20-year-old subwoofer doesn't work. It just means now we're optimizing these things. So the one I'm sort of always obvious disruptive innovation possibility be like volumetric display. So that's the classic Princess Leia Star Wars projection, which I think some people still seem to believe is real, even though in the same movie there's spaceships flying around, and that's not existing either. So this doesn't exist. It may never exist. I don't know. There's, when that happens, that's the one thing that's obvious to me, that could really be the big change. But right now, we're not seeing that, in the lab beyond little tiny demonstrations and stuff. So we'll see if that happens. That could really disrupt everything. But if we're going to build that, what does it need? We make a Princess Leia projector. What does it need? We got to rig it. We got to get power to it. That's not going to go away. And it needs data, which we're going to send over a network. So we're going to build on these standard technologies. What's missing from my list? VR, AR, that kind of stuff. Why do I have that off my list? So this is what I'm going to introduce. I think it's the first time I've talked about this idea for a long time. It's the first time I'm really putting this out. Huntington's theorem. I wrestled with the theorem idea, but the idea is if a technology is affordable and hasn't caught on, it's not gonna, right? So there's a long tradition of this, sort of this techno-utopianism, like, oh, of course, we're just going to put everything on Zoom. We're going to put college online 100%. I think we learned how horrific that is in Zoom. But when I started my career, there was people like, oh, we need to put college online. Like, no, it's a terrible idea. It's great for some things. Online learning is fantastic. We wouldn't be able to do this without Zoom, but it's not, you're missing out tremendous amounts of that experience. So this is sort of the challenge idea. The thing that, to me, part of my theorem here is the only barrier to widespread adoption of technology, of a desirable technology, things that we want that does something useful for us, is affordability, right? That's really the only barrier we got. So that's, of course, relative. These things tend to start at the high end where there's a lot more money. But if you're looking up there now, what are they doing? They're integrating a lot of the stuff. They're doing it really well. I'll talk about some examples of that. So that's sort of my idea and some examples of that. And I guess I should talk about some of these technologies only in the live show context, right? All these things are really cool, like VR, AR, XR, whatever we're going to call it today. Amazing stuff, right? I first saw it in 1993 or 4, and Jaron Lanier was at that conference, who's like sort of the father of VR. And he was like, this is changing everything. It's changing the world. And I was like, well, it's really cool, but I don't see it changing the world. And same thing with us. Like, I don't see this. It has some, again, amazing applications. It's fantastic for pre-visual, the word I can never say, pre-visualization. Is it going to replace live performance? No, right? 3D video, this is kind of come and gone. Video holograms, these aren't holograms. And these things like, oh, it's Tupac on the stage at Coachella or whatever, right? That goes back to 1862. That's called Pepper's Ghost. It's a mirror, right? It's cool. Now they're doing a video projector and a thin film instead of heavy mirror, but it's not a hologram. We can, the Princess Leia thing, that's a hologram. That doesn't exist. It exists, but not in 3D space. Spatial audio, this is an interesting one. This has been the next big thing since I've been in grad school in 1980, whatever. We had this thing called Delta Stereophony when I was at Yale in 1987, which was doing spatialized audio, localizing sound all over the stage. Hasn't caught on. It's been around. It's been in 15 iterations of it from now. Now, of course, the speaker manufacturers are marketing this. Why? Because they can sell a lot more speakers. Is it cool? Absolutely. There's some great applications for it. And there are some venues that are building this stuff that can do some interesting stuff. But as a widespread thing, it just hasn't caught on. So I don't think it will, unless there's some big change of that. Immersive is just meaningless now. Like, we've been doing immersive stuff for 1,000 years, but now it's like the buzzword du jour. Like, everything is immersive. Like, it's just ridiculous. Metaverse, again, I don't know. To me, other than this kind of stuff, I want to spend as little time in my life on Zoom as possible, or on any sort of virtual anything. I want to be out in the actual world as much as possible. And I think I'm not the only one, because the live show market is just absolutely booming right now. Like, you cannot hire enough people to do this stuff. There's a lot of sort of big shakeups in that world, but people, it's not like, oh, this was great sitting at home 24/7. Let's do this forever, right? Let's just move online and, be in the matrix. Like, it's not happening, right? All of this really good for us in this industry. Nothing's yet displaced the live experience in at least a couple thousand years, right? This is the example I always use. It's called a LAN party. If anybody, I've never been to one. I want to go to one just to see it. What do they do? And I wanted to make sure that this hadn't gotten killed off by the pandemic. So this was last year in Spain. What are they doing? It's a bunch of people bringing computers into the same building and playing video games. Is there any reason to do this? No. Why are they doing it? Because they want to be in the same space with people at the same time, right? So, and this is, certainly there's a lot of overlap with this, the esports and all this kind of stuff, but the, this is an example like why we don't really have anything to worry about this stuff. And I think, again, COVID would have been the thing. Like, if we were just going to stop going to live events, or stop traveling, or stop business travel, or stop trade shows or anything, that would have been the final nail in the coffin. And what happened? Everybody's back, right? There's a big trade show in Spain right now. Everybody's there in person, right? Could you do it virtually? Absolutely, but it sucks virtually, so nobody does it. So, okay, I think I'm good on time here. So show control, which I talk about a little bit. What is it? It's just connecting one or more entertainment control systems together. So this is from our haunted house. We did an abbreviated version in 2021. Weren't able to do it 2022. Unfortunately, we may not be able to do it in this form again. But anyway, in this attraction, there's lighting, sound, video up here. Those are independent entertainment control systems, and we're bringing them all together. And there's 3 ways to do that. Basically, this is all from my book. I know that Rich uses this in the class. Time-based, we'll talk a little about that. Event-based, and then a hybrid. So time-based means like this video is a time sequence, and there's a sensor in the room that's triggered by when the people enter it. So we don't know when that's going to be. So that's a hybrid system, right? That's an event triggering a time-based system. So there's the, 2-minute what is show control thing. A little bit of history and like how does it impact from this? This goes back to 1964, not, right. This was a year before that Beatles concert. So there's something in the zeitgeist happening around that time. All analog, all time-based. And I have a video from my older edition of the book, which I'm trying to phase out here. But I have a video online where I talk about this history a little bit, and I have some clips from Disney there that shows the history of stuff is pretty interesting. If you're interested, that's on my website. What that does is it gave us repeatability and precision that you couldn't do otherwise, right? And so usually, in most cases, I think the technologies, at least in the live event space, the live show space, tends to just mean we do more with the same number of people, and things like theme parks, which just wouldn't be practical if we didn't have automation technology, right? So I'm never worried about technology like, oh, it's going to put us all out of work. It's like, nope, somebody has to do all this stuff, because why are we there? We're there to tell or listen to a story, right? And I'm also not that worried about, the chat GPT or whatever, fascinating stuff, but like, do I want to read poetry generated by the thing? No, because it doesn't mean anything to me. So is it a cool thing? Does it have great applications? Sure. Is it going to do I want to watch a movie generated by that? Probably not, because, I know that's a whole other tangent. I can go about that. So this time-based stuff though, to me, so when I got out of school, I showed those old projectors in the mid 80s. I was, working these things like programming the PLC inside of this thing. And I was like, this just seems dumb, right? We're telling the drummer from Pink Floyd, putting a click track in his ear, right? Metronome track in his ear, and telling him to synchronize to this, 100-year-old film projector. Just seemed dumb to me. Turned out I don't want to jump ahead, but yeah, that was sort of the idea. And I wasn't alone in that idea. So around that time, by 1989, there was some of these shows like the Indiana Jones Epic Stunt Spectacular. I have some video of that in that video I just talked about at Disney. It's still running. There's some pretty cool things in there where a performer runs on stage and like these big punji sixes shoot up out of the stage, and they're actually controlling them by pressing switches in the floor and stuff like that. Really great stuff. This has been around now forever, right? Then this sort of the next level of this was this thing called George Lucas Super Live Adventure, which is what this picture's from, and I found on this website down here. Some friends of mine of that friends of mine worked on that. It was a show of like George Lucas's greatest hits, so it was Star Wars, Raiders of the Lost Ark, all these things. Was built here, went to Japan, never came back. So it played in arenas over there. But that same team then came back to Vegas in 1995 and did this show called EFX featuring Michael Crawford. Not a great show, didn't last very long. But the idea is there was a huge amount of these things where it handed the control back to the performers, right? So in that super live thing, they would have a laser blast that would shoot over here. And so the performer was triggering a laser that would hit a sensor over here. That would go through a box that my friends had made. And that would send out a MIDI signal to this thing and do all this stuff. Really incredibly complicated stuff, from that whole idea. So this is the mindset that I was in when I first wrote my book in the first edition, 1994. Like, this is the word we're in, like, oh, seems obvious to me. We're going to hand all this control back to the performers, right? That's where we should hand it off. And then this really matured in about 2005, Ka, which I think is a huge milestone in that. Still playing in Vegas is worth seeing. It's just an unbelievable show. It's Robert Lepage, who's just a brilliant it's one of those rare shows to me where you get the spectacle and the story both are functional. I mean, things at that scale are always difficult. And I would say, unlike Awakening, which just opened, they didn't get that right. It's an unbelievable spectacle. It's kind of a mess. I hope they'll fix that, because there's just really beautiful stuff in it, but it's very hard to connect to that show. So then right around that time, only a couple years later, this is a picture from this Australian dance company called Chunky Move, and I have video of this also in that sort of show control video, and it's all online. You can find it, which is the great thing about all this YouTube and everything. They were now doing similar ideas, not on the same scale, but like a year later, a year after CA opened, which was millions of dollars, custom stuff, overclocked computers, like just insane. And now, like a year or two later, this little Australian dance company was doing pretty incredible stuff. And I saw this at BAM here in New York. And I was just like, wow. So it was a great and very moving show, but they were really doing cool stuff with this interactive technology. So that's almost 20 years ago now. Has it caught on? No, it hasn't. So this is Jurassic World Live. So this is actually the same producers as Super Live from 30 years before. I'm terrible at math in my head. This is out on tour right now. This is the same sort of structure as this Marvel Universe Live that was running, I don't know, maybe 2-3 years before the pandemic. This is the producers are trying to shift to more, they're trying to get a different audience. So they're doing this thing with these dinosaurs and stuff. But this show is almost entirely locked to time. The performers are basically pantomiming. I think there's 1 or 2 live mics on the show. It's all, they press play. If you watch the sound setup for this, or you look at the sound setup for this, it's a very small control position. I think it's probably QM, but it's something they're hitting go, they're running the track, everybody does it, and they move on to the next thing. There is some interactivity, though. It's kind of interesting. Oh, sorry. Sound effects are triggered by technicians. So if there's a fight scene or something, there's a technician with a keyboard there, and they're hitting all the punch sounds and various effects and stuff like that. But it's not very different from Super Live, where the performer was triggering a thing that did this, and through this chain. Now it's just somebody sitting there on a keyboard, playing it. That's a real skilled position, but it's not performer interactive stuff like what was being done in the 90s. They are using black tracks, though, to track all this stuff. So that means they can position the moving lights and lasers and video and all this stuff on the dinosaur, the performer, or whatever. They even just stick one of these black tracks packs right on probably on this Jeep, on pieces of scenery, all this stuff. It's pretty amazing stuff, but it's so that is giving, it's not really giving control to the performers, because they're not really activating anything. It's just making it easier to follow them. So it means that, and again, I don't think they have follow spot positions on those shows, but they have a huge load in crew. So again, it didn't really put anybody to work unless all you know how to do is follow spot. So basically that's just meaning we're automating the follow spot position. It's not really like, we're not, the timing of the show and the meaning of the show is not changing or anything by what the actions the performers are doing. So yeah, so here's the same producers, same venues. They play in, ice hockey arenas all around the country. Very similar structure. They're not doing this stuff. So again, based on that Huntington's theorem, like if it hasn't gone on in 30 years and it's affordable, it's not going to catch on. So I think I was wrong about this, which is kind of an interesting mindset. I think you learned by admitting you're wrong about things. So time code actually goes back to the 60s, but sort of 19 eras time code or some equivalent is everywhere now. And it's all kinds of places you likely wouldn't even expect. Almost, it's like I shoot a lot of friends' bands here in New York and stuff. And so I went to one, and there was an opening act of this kind of cover band. And I'm up close to stage with my camera, and I have earplugs in and everything. And I'm like, where's that guitar solo coming from? Like looking around, there's nobody playing it, because they're actually running their entire set to track, right? So the drummer triggers something, and they're just running the thing to do backing tracks on a live show of a cover band in a small, venue with 20 people, 50 people, right? So the budget is not the challenge anymore, but they seem to like it, right? Musicians seem to be, this is an area I want to research myself. The musicians seem very happy and comfortable just locking down to a tempo and not changing it. So that whole idea of like, oh, we should be letting the drummer, drive this video. Oh, and I forgot to put that in there, but we actually did this, God, 15 years ago. at school, we took this, my colleague's virtual orchestra system, which is like a conductible sort of sampled orchestra system. And we use that to vary speed dataton watch out. So that means you could conduct the music and have the video track it in tempo. We post that online, no feedback whatsoever. Nobody's doing that stuff anymore, but it's certainly possible. Again, I don't mean nobody, but it's not in widespread use. So it's kind of interesting. Creators seem very comfortable with this sort of lockdown. And so this Lindy effect idea, time-based control has been around for a long time. It's going to continue to be around for a long time. And again, sort of Huntington's theorem here, we've had this stuff for a long time. And beyond some edge cases, that still, is it useful? Sure. But it hasn't gone on in sort of widespread use. So I really don't think that it's gonna. And the reason for that is the performant activity, it takes an immense amount of time to do this. So that time is money. So that means it's not really that affordable. So is there a technological solution to save time for that? Probably not, right? Because anybody that's ever programmed one of these shows, you realize like time-based stuff is pretty, I don't want to say it's not easy, but it's very straightforward to program. Anything interactive is like orders of magnitude more complicated to program. Oh, and the other, somebody pointed out, I was looking for that word theorem, and somebody pointed out that I already have a law that I named, and that is in show control programming or any sort of show programming, the amount of time it takes to do the programming is equal to the amount of time available. So I did this, I wrote this in my book, like I had a guy call up from a boardroom, restaurant programmers, like I usually charge like an hour per button, and then we do it in the boardroom spinner. So I'm like, I literally didn't understand what he was talking about. It's like, well, if you got a week, that's how long it's going to take. If you have a month, it's going to take a month, right? So this is sort of the other thing. So all this stuff, like, to save time, like I don't think that's going to pop up and exist anytime soon. So I could be wrong, but again, this stuff's been around 20, 30 years. So I don't think it's going to happen there. It looks like I'm on time here. Good. So impacts on live storytelling with this. So I think this technological maturity is a really great thing because we now can paint instead of having to paint the paintbrush. So this is, I'm going to show you a video clip from this. Is a show I just saw in Vegas, which I really love. And this is not a big budget show, but they're using these tools in just really, really beautiful ways and very well done. And I don't think there's some AR stuff on there, but I don't think in the main show there's any interactive. I think it's all time-based. I think what we really need to do now is our sort of creative people, designers, directors, and so on, they need to push these boundaries, because I think the tools we haven't, they're just sort of figuring these out. This has only been 10 or 15 years in an industry, a couple thousand years old, that we have these tools, and we haven't come near to kind of hitting the boundaries on these things yet. So just a couple examples of this. I'm just on a recent trip. I was out on my way out to LDI, I stopped, and this is right on my website. You can take a look at this. So this I thought was interesting. It's the Church of Cannabis in Denver. They bought an old church, painted it, and they do this pretty insane projection mapping show that they do a few times a day as a fundraiser for the thing. Pretty cool stuff. And what did it take them to do this? Like, scroll down here, being a geek, of course I went, it's one computer with some, this arena mapping software on it. There's an old analog Mackie over here, older than probably some students on this call. There's some HDMI stuff out, and then here's some speakers they stuck in the corner. So those tool set is available for, not a big budget organization, but they had some ideas and were able to kind of create this thing. It's pretty cool. Also on this trip, I saw David Byrne's Theater of the Mind. Let me share I'm sorry, I have to change my sharing so that you can see the video properly. Hold on one second. This thing, it won't be all stuttery. There we go. So,
the theater of the mind.
The short
theater of the mind. You don't know what you'll find in the theater of the mind. It's all inside your head. It's all inside your head.
I'm going to go ahead and mute so that's David Byrne made this show. Pretty cool show. But it's sort of a walkthrough attraction, much like what we were doing at Graves and Inn. It just closed. Unfortunately, I wouldn't be surprised if it comes back somewhere else. Let's see, make sure I go back over here. There we go. Okay, good. So see it. But again, this is a guy, a real, amazing creative genius who's been just doing amazing stuff for decades, and he's doing this stuff. But again, they had them write some code and so on, but they didn't have to invent anything to do the show, which is sort of the idea here. And then this one, I think, yeah, I got time. I'm going to run this video here. We should be still in the right sharing mode here. So this is a show called Speed of Dark by this company called Particle Inc. in Vegas. It's really amazing. It's a like 1 minute, 35-second video. I'm just going to run this and then I think wrap up.
This ghost in time. She whispers of the fears that keep us locked inside. We got the walls that crumble.
And so that show, just in a little warehouse in Vegas that they use these, just brilliantly use. And I honestly, I'm so bored of projection mapping. Like you see it everywhere, like, oh, right, now the bricks in the building are going to crumble. And now we're going to do this, like, and we're going to have a clock and whatever. But these guys really did some beautiful stuff with some, they had just a beautiful animations. I don't think any of that's interactive. I'm going to find out eventually. I believe they're just performing to the track of this thing, and they have a lot of there's a lot of circus in it and some other things in that. But again, this is, I think, it's just a beautiful example of just using these tools and giving these really powerful tools to people without an enormous budget now in order to do that. So I think that's where I'm excited to see what sort of the next generation of designers, directors, and creative people. And that one is creators credit on that is animator, a theater director, and then a video guy. Like that's the main creators on that, and it's just a beautiful show. And that one closed, but it's supposed to reopen, I believe, in the next year or so somewhere else in Vegas. So I will definitely be on a plane to go see that thing when it comes out. And then the other thing I won't go through it, but I did some consulting on this MSG Sphere, which is being built in Las Vegas. I got to stick my head in there during LDI time back, and so a couple months ago. That's sort of the other extreme of this, where they're making just enormous. It's a giant sphere covered with video inside and out, and there's like 14,000 seats or something in it. So that's sort of the other extreme. But again, it's an amazing integration of all these things, but they didn't have to invent video walls to do this. There's a new sort of generation of sound system there. It's sort of based on some older ideas stuff. But again, they're just doing incredible integration of all these things, which is sort of where I think we are now. And I, of course, can ramble on about this for a long time, but I think I'm at a good stopping point if there's any questions or comments or anything.
John, thank you. I've been watching Mary's face out of the corner of my eye. So I've known John for a while. I've taught some of this material. I'm familiar with his writing. But I think if you're not familiar with John and his work, the fire hose of information that he just gave to all of us in 45 minutes about the history and the breadth and depth of this part of the industry is phenomenal. So if you didn't know before you joined us, I'm going to maybe embarrass John a little bit here by saying you got the chance to meet with the one person in the industry who knows, I would say, more about all of this than anybody else. So there you go. So I hope you all enjoyed that. I've been watching Lauren type a whole lot over there, so I'm wondering if we've got some questions.
Usually have one, there are several comments.
Okay, we've got one question and a bunch of comments. What's the question?
So the majority of impactful and inspiring use of technology is when the story drives the technology. But as technology will advance outside of the story, for example, by manufacturers, workshopping, homebrewing, etc., how does this make it back to the storytellers, expanding their vocabulary and toolkit?
Okay, if you couldn't hear that, that was a very long question, but I'm going to try to repeat it for everybody here. Basically, what John was saying was that the experiences seem to work best when the story drives what's happening. But as technology is advancing, whether that's industry technology or people homebrew, makerspace kind of stuff, how do you think that makes it back to the storytelling to become sort of fulfill that first need?
Oh, and I looked in the Q&A, and that question's from Drew, whose last name I can never pronounce, but who's a friend of mine, a great guy that does like crazy high-tech video systems. So he's worked on a lot of these things. Yeah, and I think it's interesting. I think, and I can go on for this for another hour about snobbery in the theater world. And I literally have a blog post called theatrical, in the last 5 years, called Theatrical Snobbery. And I think the big problem, I think it's happening outside of the traditional sort of theater culture, because I think most theater people are way too insular and don't get out enough and see some of these things. And they wouldn't go like, oh, that's spectacle, I'm not going to watch that. I'm not going to go to some weird. Actually, the thing in Vegas that I just showed you was there is actually a traditional theater person involved with that. But and the other example I always use of that is a show that unfortunately closed during the pandemic, but there's a really incredible show. It's written up on my website called Say Something Bunny here in New York, where these are some documentary filmmakers basically found QLab, and then they made this crazy show with like a circular table where the audience is playing different roles in a way that sounds horrifying to me as an introvert, like, oh God, I want to, but it's really great, the whole thing. So I think what happens is that these tools, because they're so affordable now, will trickle down to the creative people, and they will find them on their own. I don't know. I wish that the theater world would do this. And I used to, like I said, we did this haunted house for 20 something years, and we were an unusual school that ran entertainment technology. And I mean, my tense is weird because I'm in the middle of retiring. So I keep saying we, but I'm on my way out. But we're in a school of entertainment technology. We didn't have directors and actors in the program, but we partner, because we're in New York, we partner with people. Right now we're partnering with longtime friends in the Bindlestiff Family Circus, and we're producing a monthly live circus variety show that we stream. And I'm actually going back to, one of my students is covering for me. I'm going back to cover that next next month. So I can then watch that online because it's really fun. But I think in the theater world, like, they just don't get out enough. And I think this is a big problem, where they're just like, they're too much in the silo, they're too much in the same thing. But I think what they risk by doing that is just being irrelevant. And I think the problem solves itself by people like these particle ink people just finding these tools and then having an idea. And they did this. I only found out about them this year. I'm sort of super excited about them, but I just dug in this on my website that they've been doing this for like a decade. So it's not even new. It took them a long time. So people are finding that the tools are trickling down, and people are finding them outside of the traditional sort of theater realm, which is also, that's where, if you want to look at where is the disruption, that's probably it, right? The people, they're just going to do the 11,000th Shakespeare production, which certainly has some value or whatever, but they also need to like go find something different and talk to somebody different and do something, if you want to do something new.
Sure. Lauren, are there any other questions? Lauren's looking. No? Okay. Okay. Mary, do you have any questions, or you?
No, I mean, I'm full up. I just want to say that this has been a masterclass. Really.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
Masterclass. And we're so fortunate to have you with us today, because that history, capturing that history, is a big deal, right? Too often we kind of lose track of history. And as we see, we're destined to repeat it in bad ways. So
Sometimes, yeah. I mean, I think, Lauren's saying we got a question. So
Hand up if I want to talk.
sure, we can try. We'll see what happens. Sure.
Yay, can you hear me?
We can.
Yes.
Okay, the chat box isn't enabled for me for whatever reason, so I was like, I'll raise my hand. So hi, I work with both Rich and Mary, and you had me typing crazily to capture all the notes of things that you've been saying, and I'm already ordering copies of books. And so one of the things that got me thinking was there seems to be a story of like the technology doesn't seem to be pushing things. It's really the education of the people doing this. Is that a fair assessment? And I mean, not to say that technology can't push it, but you seem to be really about what does it mean to develop the people? And
That's a really interesting question that I don't think I really touched on it here, but I think that's absolutely true. That again, what are we? The whole reason we're doing this is to either tell or listen to stories, right? So I think all these technologies should always be developed to solve a storytelling challenge or problem or whatever. Because I think just to make like, oh, I made a thing, like that's, great. But I think that's probably true with like any technologies that made to solve a problem. But yeah, and I don't know, I have to say after doing it, and you can look back, like I said, I wrote an article now probably 20 years ago, kind of attacking the conservatory theater system for technical people, not for, actors and directors. And actually I got an award from USITT, which is all conservatory theater people, about that. I think there's a lot of people on our end of it that agree with this, but yeah, I'm after many, again, sort of that Huntington theorem, like it hasn't changed in a long time in that world. I'm not that optimistic about it. Sort of like the theater people coming up and sort of solving this problem of what's new, because they really just sort of fumble around. And they don't really, they don't know where to go because they just don't go out enough. I mean, when I was at Yale, like did a lot of sound design stuff, and a lighting designer I worked with, just a brilliant lighting designer, had never been to a rock concert in his life. And I'm like, how can you, I mean, the guy was a really great designer, but it's just your world is so closed off. How are you going to get new ideas with that? And I think this is the big problem in the theater in general for me. And why, I mean, I have everything I've written out at some point on my website. I also have a blog post in there, like I forgot what I think I call it, I love live performance, but not with a fourth wall. And it took me 2 degrees in theater and 20 years in the business to realize that I don't like most traditional theater, right? I love things, performance, I love circus, concerts, magic, whatever, and being in the room with people, all that's really important to me. And that's what I'm trying to do a lot more of, and now that I have more free time. But like to go watch a bunch of things where people are pretending I'm not in the same room with them just never felt right to me, and didn't, unlike, and again, like that particling thing, I think there's definitely a fourth wall in there, but the way that it's staged and the way they use technology brings you inside that. So it's not there. It's not just like, oh, somebody made a noise, I can't acknowledge it. That kind of stuff drives me crazy. So, but that's just my own sort of snobbery. So,
well, snobbery or not, that's a whole other conversation. But I think there's an interesting conversation there about, I went to see a production at a theater just last weekend, and cell phones went off in the middle of the room, right? And people had brought food in, which was new to me, right? The notion that you could bring food and drink into a live theater performance, that was sort of verboten for a long time. And my initial response was, why are you making all this noise with the packaging, right? Like, stop it, you're distracting. And then I went, wait a minute. However many years ago in the Globe Theater, that was the deal. You were chewing on a turkey leg and people were throwing food at each other, and maybe not even going outside to go to the bathroom. And when did we get to this place where you weren't actually in the room? Anyway, I think there's a whole thing to talk about there.
Absolutely.
We are close to time. So John, thank you so much. This was fantastic.
It's my pleasure.
It's great. This will be up on our website as a recording soon, and it's on our YouTube channel. A couple of announcements to share before we let you all go. First up is our next First Friday is in 1 month on March 3rd. We'll be joined by Jeff Reeder of Clark Reeder Engineering, and he'll be here to talk to us about the breadth of projects they work on in the entertainment field, from designing foundations for roller coasters to temporary stages for concerts. So join us for that. Registration will be available for that soon. Watch our social media and your email for that. And also, registration is now open for our annual Symposium on Education and Entertainment and Engineering. This will be back on our campus here at Purdue in West Lafayette on July 28th and 29th. You can get to the registration link on our website. We're going to drop a piece of new and exciting news right here that no one else knows. It's not even on our website yet. We're excited to share that as of yesterday, Katie Murphy, who is the Vice President for Communications and Marketing for Meow Wolf, will be a featured speaker at the symposium to talk about some of the things related to what John was just talking about. Actually, they're doing some really exciting stuff. They might use the word immersive. John poo-pooed that word. We'll have a whole conversation about that at the symposium.
They deserve
This
it.
is a good word or not.
They deserve it for
What's
that. They are people who can use it correctly. And I just saw I've now seen all three of them over the last, back to the original one, and that's exciting. So
yeah, it's exciting. We're real thrilled to have them, Katie, with us. So check out our website, register for the symposium. We hope to see you all there.